Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Call me, have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Stunned. They're all stunned. All the experts, all those professors and the liberal commentariat, all those political leaders, all of those political parties, all of those leader writers, all of those espresso macchiato drinking, nanny employing Europhiles, they're all stunned that the British working class has rejected them. Britain is out. Cameron is out. Corbyn might be out. Scotland might be out. What a good day to be back on the radio after a brief interregnum of some 4 short years. It's George Galloway. It's the mother of all talk shows, and it's with you until 10 p.m. You know the telephone line. Hit the phones, Jack and Jacqueline.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Well, just in case you don't know, it's 0844 499 1000. Calls cost 7 pence a minute plus your access charge, but we'll call you back. You can also text me, and I used to get hundreds, sometimes thousands of texts. If you want to, you can text me on Talk, and then your message to 87222. Text cost 25 pence plus your standard network charges. You can email me through the Talk Radio website, talkradio-.co.uk. And you can tweet me, because this is the 21st century, at Talk Radio or at George Galloway. Or you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/talkradio-UK. Well, when it was fixed that I would be back on the radio today, no one could have imagined how seismic a day this would turn out to be. It was said that the 23rd of June will forever be remembered, but actually the 24th of June has turned out to be, if anything, an even more momentous day. I called it absolutely right. I said that we would vote to leave. I said that Cameron would be gone before lunchtime. And at 8:30 this morning, before he'd even had his breakfast, he was gone. Now the runners and riders are obvious enough, although over the course of the show we'll canvass some of those. But we didn't expect Dame, Baroness, Duchess, whatever title in which she now rejoices, Margaret Hodge, the billionaire dowager of Islington, but representing Barking and Dagenham, which voted overwhelmingly for Lexit, Brexit, exit from the EU. Nonetheless, she thinks that Jeremy Corbyn is to blame. Jeremy Corbyn, who did everything that he could for them. More fool him. He should have stuck with the courage of his convictions. I sat beside him in Parliament for almost 30 years, and I've marched with him for almost 40 years. And if you think that Jeremy Corbyn was really pro-EU, you've never heard a hostage reading out a list of their kidnappers' demands. But nonetheless, he did it. He did the duty that they imposed upon him. And according to the polls, 60% of Labour voters followed him. The 40% are very disappointed in Labour. And there's a very real danger that they won't be coming back. And many, who knows how many, of the 60% who did vote Remain only did so because Jeremy Corbyn asked them to. So it seems churlish in the extreme, if you ask me, to now be demanding Jeremy Corbyn's head on a platter. What about the British economy? We were told that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse would soon be riding over the horizon if Britain voted to leave. War, famine, pestilence, and disease were all going to be visited upon us. We were told that the economy was going to fall over a cliff today, but it hasn't. The pound is down 3%, and the FTSE 100 index is down 2.5%. Well, that's just not even a bad day at the office, because the fundamentals have not changed. And what are those fundamentals? That we are the 5th biggest economy in the world. We have a population of 65 million. We have a name and a reputation in the world. We have a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations forever, unless we ourselves voted to come off it. And we're sitting on hundreds of international fora as big political and economic players. Don't let anyone persuade you that Britain is too small, too poor, or too stupid to be an independent country, which is what we are now back on track to being. For me, this has nothing to do with nationalism. I hate nationalism. That's why I campaigned throughout Scotland in 2014 to stop the breakup of this island of English-speaking people. And I give you this notice, Nicola Sturgeon, I'll be back up the road campaigning against you in any independence referendum that you now try to spring. You lost the last referendum. You lost this referendum. The gracious thing to do would be to accept the result of both of those referenda. But if you don't, then trouble lies ahead. It's true also that there are issues raised about Ireland. As it's cards on the table time, let me say that I have always supported Irish unity, and I think that now would be a good time to reopen the issue of Irish unity. Indeed, it is axiomatic that it arises from the fact that Britain will shortly have a border with the European Union on the northern and southern Irish borders. So we'll be talking about all of these things, and I'll be asking for your calls. Now, let me give you the number again. It's 0844 499 1000. That's 08444 99 1000. The number's changed since I was last here. Everything is fresher. There's been a new coat of paint, although maybe it was painted just for me. You know how the Queen thinks that the world smells of new paint. But I must say, talk radio has turned out to be a terrific new entry into the media market, and I hope that the mother of all talk shows, restored in splendour every Friday night between 7 and 10, is going to be an addition to the smorgasbord of talent, the tapas of talent that talk radio already offers. But it can only be if you join in. That's why I need your calls, your texts, your emails, and even your tweets if this show is going to become again the university of the airwaves that the old mother of all talk shows was. And this is the point that I have to get all melancholy. If there's one man in Britain who would have been looking forward to be the first call on this restored mother of all talk shows radio show, it would have been Carl in Plasto. Every Friday, every year, for 7 years, Carl in Plasto elucidated, enlightened, educated me and all of us. But sadly, he died just a couple of months ago whilst waiting for the show to come back. And I said at his funeral, at which I spoke, that I would dedicate the first of the new mother of all talk shows to the memory of Carl in Plasto. Carl McCulloch, may you rest in peace. May God have mercy upon your soul. Okay, we're talking about the referendum. We're talking about David Cameron and who's going to succeed him and what should happen next. Well, I'm very clear. It's obvious that Boris Johnson is going to succeed him, but Boris Johnson cannot be trusted to go into the negotiations for withdrawal from the European Union without a democratic mandate from the British people. And I give him this piece of advice as a near 30-year parliamentarian myself. It's no use doing what Gordon Brown did and failing to go to the people for their endorsement, especially before entering into a negotiation period of such moment. And therefore, I'm calling for a general election. If not now, then very soon indeed. But who will be facing Boris Johnson if such an election happens? Will it be Jeremy Corbyn? Will it be the Dowager, the Duchess, Margaret Hodge? Will it be Dan Jarvis, the paratrooper? Who will it be? Who's going to be the Labour leader when that general election comes? I again put my cards on the table. Jeremy Corbyn is a friend of mine, and I believe that he is an honest and sincere man who did his duty. I wish he hadn't done it with the gusto with which he did, but that's all now in the past. The best thing for Labour to do would be to get behind Jeremy Corbyn and get ready for a new general election. 0844 499 1000, that's the number to call me. I don't know if the switchboard is lighting up in the way that it used to. Whenever it dimmed, I used to throw in two subjects. Let me say to my production team, and it's a big team behind the glass, if things are slacking, we'll discuss dangerous dogs, or we'll discuss Margaret Thatcher and her funeral, although in those days her funeral was then yet to come. But these are the two fallback positions, default positions for the mother of all talk shows. But somehow I don't believe that tonight will be in want of your telephone calls. 0844 499 1000. Let's see now where we are. Any callers? Let's take a break then.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Well, my screen is already lighting up. Here's a text from James Tooney, who is the grandson of the champion of the world, Gene Tooney, and whom I knew briefly a few years back. He's a very great artist, actually. He says, George, great to hear you. Great day for democracy. Greetings from Sweden. And another, I think, an email. Hello, Mr. Galloway. Welcome back on air. I'm an East Lothian resident. The East Lothian question, not the West. I voted leave in the EU referendum with left internationalist reasons. I voted no in the Scottish referendum. So far, so good. Opposed to nationalism like yourself, but as each council area of Scotland voted Remain by a high margin, I can't but feel I must abstain, not vote, in the likely second referendum, to be fair to the clear pro-EU view of the whole of Scotland. Is it not true that even though I voted for it, Scotland has indeed been dragged out of Europe against its will? Sorry, text is so long. Well, actually, nobody's been dragged out of Europe. We've been dragged out of the European Union by a democratic vote in a referendum in which we had record numbers participating. So nobody got dragged out of anything. Nicola Sturgeon wanted to drag Scotland out of Britain without asking the people who live in the rest of Britain. You've just got to roll with these things. And another, finally, on Twitter, George, sad to hear about the death of Carl from Plasto. He'll be sorely missed. It was an education just listening to him. Amen. Now, as I said, the FTSE 100 began the day falling more than 8%, but it then regained most of that and stood 2.5% lower at the close. And the pound, which we were told was going to fall off a cliff, had a modest fall also. That's because there's no need to panic. Keep calm and carry on. At least that's my advice. Let's hear from Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager, to see if that's likely to be advice heeded in the city and amongst the speculators and the gnomes of Zurich, as Harold Wilson used to call them. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, George.
Were you surprised by the final figures at the end of the day? Did you think it was going to be worse?
I wrote to my clients at about 10:30 this morning, 2 hours after the markets opened, that, for example, the FTSE, which had been 10% down overnight in the futures market, was actually at that point 4% down. In other words, actually 6% up on the lows. So the fact that the markets closed only a little bit down from where they closed yesterday, I wasn't hugely surprised. However, the big picture is, George, it appears to me that the economy and stock markets and etc. peaked probably over a year ago. So the stock market's falling anyway, the pound's falling anyway, and you know what? These people who are complaining that the great British public have voted to leave the EU and we're all going to go to hell in the handcart now, isn't that funny that government bonds that no one talks about have gone through the stratosphere?
Yeah.
In other words, everyone is prepared to lend money to the UK government because it's a safe bet. So people should get it out of their head that leave creates economic annihilation. On the contrary, the markets look at the global economy, not whether or not we're in a political construct.
Amen, amen. I couldn't have put that better myself. Thanks for setting the record straight on that, Jonathan. Now, the truth is, the European Union is the entity that is in serious economic trouble, isn't it? Much more trouble than the British economy is. It is the Eurozone, which is now, or soon will be when we go, more or less all of the European Union, is in very serious trouble. And Greece may well have to again default. And the economies of Southern Europe in particular are by no means out of the wood. Half of the children in Greece are hungry, official. Half of the young people in Spain and Portugal are unemployed, official. And then there's Italy, which, by the way, just elected a strongly anti-EU mayor in Rome just a day or two ago. So it's the EU that's got problems, not us.
Yeah. It is amazing that the Remain side said that we're going to use this phrase again, we're going to have global economic annihilation if we leave, and yet, as you just rightly said, Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, they are economically toast. It's beyond obvious. And all you have to do, you know, I know how much you love the stock market, you being a communist and all that, but all you have to do is look at the bank share prices in the Eurozone. Take, for example, the biggest bank in Europe, Deutsche Bank, obviously the biggest German bank as well. Its share price is below the lows of 2008 during the biggest banking collapse in history. So the market, and it's not just Deutsche, Credit Suisse, Bank Paribas, Italia, you name it, the banks across the Eurozone and indeed in the UK, Hong Kong, Shanghai, HSBC, Barclays, and in America, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. Just look at the banks' share prices. When the banks are doing well in a debt-fueled economy, you can basically say the economy's okay. But when the market has, for the last year and a half, been selling bank shares off like Billio, and particularly the Euro banks, and they are now at the lows of 2008, you know there is a great problem in the system, and I'm telling you and your listeners, there is soon going to be a Lehman's moment. I can't tell you when, and I can't tell you from where, but all I need to do is look at the bank share prices, and I know that the market knows something. I just don't know what it is. And it hasn't just happened overnight since this vote. No, it's been happening for a year and a half.
Jonathan, that's fantastic stuff. I hope you'll come back on the mother of all talk shows.
You'd be welcome. I'd be delighted.
Excellent, my friend. There was indeed a fall in the share price of Barclays and RBS. And just for the record, whilst I look forward to the day when the last bank manager is strangled by the last promissory note, it's not because I'm a communist, because I'm not, in fact, a communist. But Jonathan Davis, who's very far from a communist, an economist and wealth manager, just set the record straight there about the economy. Actually, leaving the European Union will be good for our economy, because we won't be leaving Europe, and we'll still trade with Europe, but we will be rejoining the world. The world is now our oyster, the world on which we turned our back in 1973 when I was a callow youth. I campaigned in the referendum in 1975 under the leadership of the late and great Tony Benn, and we lost. And I campaigned in this referendum. And guess what? We won. So I hope that Mr. Benn up there in heaven is looking down on all of this with a twinkle in his eye. Well, coming up, we've got Vince Cable, the best Chancellor of the Exchequer we never had. It's George Galloway. It's the mother of all talk shows. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. But you can text, and you can email, and you can tweet. And we've even got a Facebook page. So get involved in the mother of all talk shows, won't you? I'm talking about the EU referendum, of course. I'm talking about the Conservative leadership race, the runners and riders. Have a word with Vince Cable in a minute or two about that. I'm talking about the challenge to Jeremy Corbyn. The putsch is now on, I can exclusively reveal. I'm not revealing that there's a motion of no confidence. You already knew that. What I am revealing is that it's serious and it intends to defenestrate my old pal, Jeremy Corbyn. And I'm talking about the economy. And who better than the man who many, many hours in whose company we spent in the mother of all talk shows when he was a cabinet minister, but sadly not quite the most powerful cabinet minister. I always used to describe him as the best chancellor we never had. I still think that, although he's a bit shaky on one or two things. Well, Dr. Vince, what do you make of all this?
Well, it is a big, if I want to use a posh word, discontinuity. It's a big revolutionary change. As somebody who argued the Remain case, I know you were on the other side of the argument, but I think many of the things that were warned about, not by George Osborne, but by independent people, the IMF, the Governor of the Bank of England, I mean, those things are now likely to happen. You know, the big hit on the economy, the impact on jobs. So on that level, we can see things unfolding. What's less predictable is how we navigate as a country and the new arrangement with the European Union without it becoming a very messy and aggressive divorce. And the politics of this country are very much open for grabs. The upheaval that is potentially going to take place in the Labour Party is a key part in all that.
Well, let's talk about the man that's job you should have had, Chancellor George Osborne. He made a big mistake, didn't he, with the way he conducted the referendum campaign, the threat, for that's what it was, of an emergency budget, increases in taxes, telling pensioners could no longer guarantee their pensions and so on. Surely he's toast, no?
I think he is, actually, not necessarily for the reasons you've given in that order, but you're right. I think he was the architect in many ways of the Remain campaign, at least on the government side. It backfired very badly, and I agree with you. I think the threat of the alternative budget was economically bad, quite apart from anything else. That's not how you respond to a recession, and it was completely counterproductive.
Now, that rules him out, doesn't it, as a rider in the Conservative leadership race, where once he might have thought he was the heir apparent, as a result of actions that they themselves are responsible for, because you and I both know that they didn't have to have this referendum.
Exactly.
And they didn't have to fight it in the way that they did. They didn't have to lose it. So all of that means he probably won't even be a runner in the leadership race, do you think?
I think that's correct, yes. I mean, I'm, neither of us are members of the Tory party, God forbid, and we don't totally understand their psychology, but I think it is very unlikely. I think you're talking about Boris Johnson as a front runner, but front runners often fall at the difficult fences.
He could be a Devon Locke, couldn't he?
Yes, he could well be. And you've got people like Theresa May, who are very ambitious and very competent and waiting their time. And, my Tory friends, and I do have some arising out of my period in government, tell me that we should look out for a John Major type character, somebody who isn't widely known, but who will hopefully reconcile the factions. I don't know, but any of those are possible. But I think the issue that would interest us and your readers is the question about your listeners is why the next Prime Minister is going to be chosen in this very strange way, with members of Parliament choosing two candidates and Conservative Party members, of whom there aren't a great number these days, deciding who our next Prime Minister should be.
Indeed, and that takes us back, doesn't it? Because that's precisely what happened when Gordon Brown was crowned. It was a coronation, and no one, I think, as I recall, stood against him. But in any case, he was the Labour Party leader who became Prime Minister. He was never actually elected by the British people. And in a way, he ought to have gone early. Most people say that he bottled the possibility of going early after he'd handled the foot and mouth disease pretty confidently, the terrorist attacks in London and the Glasgow airport pretty competently. He should have gone then, and the history might have been different. Do you think?
Yeah, you've got a good memory. Of course, what happened immediately after was the financial crisis. We don't know whether that would have intruded on an election. But the issue which you raise is an important one, which is at what point does this new Prime Minister, whoever it is, somebody in September, have to go to the country? I think most people would expect that the new Prime Minister should seek a fresh mandate. And that's the talk today.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that, during the coalition years, we created 5-year parliaments, fixed-term parliaments, in order to provide the country with some stability. It will require 2/3 of MPs, and therefore Labour and Nationalist MPs to agree that this election take place, and this complicates matters considerably.
It's always difficult, though, for an opposition to turn down the invitation from the Prime Minister to have a general election.
Indeed. They can, of course, influence the timing, and that might prove to be crucial. I would find it very difficult to imagine, under current circumstances, that a Conservative Prime Minister going to the country seeking a mandate in the wake of this vote wouldn't get a stronger mandate. I mean, my party took a terrible hammering at the next election. I think Labour would have an awful time, particularly in the North Country cities and towns where they got a mauling yesterday. I mean, you know that part of the world because you've been an MP there. And there is a real danger, I think, of UKIP coming through as a major parliamentary force, not just a force in the country.
Yeah, I wanted to turn to that last, but just before that, let me make the point that you're right about most people expecting that, I think. As to timing, my case would be, if you're going into crucial negotiations on behalf of Britain that will set a course for Britain for the foreseeable future, for generation or generations even, you really ought to have a mandate before you do it, don't you think?
I agree, but it's complicated because, of course, all those things will be conditional on the agreement of all the 28 countries of the European Union, and we don't know what happens if this divorce becomes very messy and people start throwing plates and abducting children and things that can happen in very messy divorces.
Trust me, I know about messy divorces, Dr. Vince. Now, just before then, we have to close our conversation, and it's wonderful to be talking to you again. UKIP, isn't their raison d'etre now satisfied? Isn't it more likely that they will somehow merge into a new Tory party under new leadership? Do you really think they're going to stay the course? And if so, what's their point?
Well, that is a very good point, well made. I mean, I think I'm not totally sure that Mr. Farage is just going to disappear into the night, having
maybe disappear beside you into the House of Lords, maybe.
No, I'm not in the House of Lords. I've made it very clear I don't want to be in the House of Lords.
I'm very
No, I
sorry,
took a stand on that.
But
anyway, I think the opposite case would be what happened in relation to the SNP. Of course, their rationale was independence. They've now taken government, and they've gone from strength to strength. And it may be that UKIP, which has now implanted itself in kind of working class areas across the north of England in particular, is going to emerge as a powerful force. I dread the prospect, I have to say. I think the idea of having British politics fought out between two right-wing parties, one nastier than the other, is not a great idea, but that could happen unless people on the progressive side of politics, who at the moment are hopelessly demoralised and disunited, somehow get their act together.
They've got the men, they've got the money, and by jingo, if they do, I saw Aaron Banks say yesterday that he spent £6 million in this referendum.
Yes. Of course, one of the things you haven't mentioned, but which is also going to play into this, is that later this year, probably about the time people are thinking about a general election in Britain, we will know whether we're getting President Trump in the United States. And that raises a whole new prospect about what our alignments are going to be and whether we are in NATO or not. And the whole horror story of nationalism just getting a fresh wind. So there are a lot of imponderables.
They tell me the South Island of New Zealand is quite an attractive place for us to
maybe Scotland too, actually. I think it's probably going to be an exodus of enlightened Englishmen to Scotland in this circumstance.
Dr. Servinscable, a splendid discussion. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Bye-bye.
Again on the mother of all talk shows.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000. That's the number to call me. Let's go, little darlings. I've got texts and emails and tweets coming in shoals, and I'll turn to them just when I can. We're talking about the EU referendum result, talking about the Tory leadership, the Labour leadership, the economy, and if we've any time left, we'll talk about Britain leaving the European Union. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Let's go, little darlings, to Laura in Inner London. And she'll be, I think, my first caller. Laura, go ahead. Laura?
Hello?
Hi, Laura.
Yeah, hi.
How wonderful to hear your voice again.
Thank you for taking my call, George. Jeremy, can I just mention a couple of things about Jeremy Corbyn, for example?
Yeah.
I was disappointed that he didn't stand by his convictions and simply say everyone in this party and across the country has a different opinion. This is my opinion, that the EU is anti-democratic. We can't vote them in, we can't boot them out, and so they should have no power over us. He could have said that, and he could have said, so the rest of you vote as you wish. This is where I stand. My colleagues will stand in different places and they'll speak for themselves. But instead, he tried to toe some sort of line that someone formulated. I don't know why there had to be an official Labour position, as if they are some sort of religious cult. I don't understand that. Maybe if you could you tell me who made him talk against his own convictions?
Look, Laura, that's very, very well encapsulated, and that's exactly what I was arguing should be done. Harold Wilson didn't take any kind of active leadership role in the referendum in 1975. He he sensibly said, my colleagues all have different points of view, and let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let them persuade you if they can.
Great.
That's exactly what he should have done. Instead, he went on the road prejudicing, compromising his reputation for honesty and sincerity for the very people who are now stabbing him in the back.
Yes, absolutely. And I voted him in. So I was very disappointed, and I wasn't going to vote the way he was telling me to vote, because it doesn't seem reasonable that a government that I can't vote for or against has power over me. I mean, that is just, I can't understand how anyone in Britain could think that is a reasonable position to hold. Could I just say, in The Guardian some months ago, it was written that Nick Clegg is paid by Goldman Sachs £22,500.
Well, why not? Everybody else is working for Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
That's where all the politicians go.
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan.
Yeah. And to give a 2-hour speech bigging up the EU, and Tony Blair is paid, I don't know, £1 or £2 million by Goldman Sachs.
Oh, much more than that, Laura.
There you go. And no doubt, probably Peter Mandelson, Neil Kinnock, Alistair Campbell. You know what, George, tell me, when will we get bribery and these payments out of politics so that people can represent us instead of...
Again, let's go to Billy, who's on a mobile somewhere. I don't know where. Billy, are you on the air? Are you on the line?
I am, yes. How are you?
Go ahead, yes. Nice to hear from you. Go on.
Good. I just wanted to thank you for adding some great balance to what was quite clearly a campaign by the media to make all Brexiters as right-wing, anti-immigration, nationalistic, and I almost felt slightly embarrassed casting my vote yesterday.
Yeah. Well, that's what they wanted, Billy. That's the false dichotomy they set out to create.
Yeah, and it was just to be honest with you, the campaign from the Remainers to kind of paint everybody with that brush, for quite a while I was on the fence. And actually it worked against them for me, because it just made me think, hang on a minute, if you've got a real honest argument for your side of the fence, why do you have to resort to that and cast and dismiss everybody aside as a little England, etc., etc.? And I think actually, in the end, yourself and that campaign pulled me to the Brexit, and I'm really pleased that I made that decision.
Well, Billy, I've now fought and won 2 referendums in 2 years. And I tell you what, Nicola Sturgeon, I'm ready to fight a third. Thanks a lot, Billy. Richard is in Crawley in Surrey. Let's hear from him. Richard, go ahead, sir.
Hi, George.
Hi.
What I'm really interested in is freedom of movement for us UK citizens. That's what I'm really worried about. Am I going to lose that? Because that's basically what I've been looking forward to. I've been sort of preparing for moving to the Netherlands in a few years' time, but not the time is not right now. But maybe in the future I would want to go there. I've always planned that. Now, it's all up in the air now. Basically my life could be ruined because of this vote. Do you think freedom of movement should be maintained for us UK citizens?
Well, that's a matter for the government of the Netherlands, as it quite properly should be. It's up to them whether they want to give you freedom of movement in and out of their country. My own wife is from the Netherlands, so I can take an educated guess that the government of the Netherlands will be happy to afford you freedom of movement. But they have the right to decide that themselves, just as we have the right, or soon will, to decide the freedom of movement in and out of our own country. What's wrong? What's wrong with that, Richard? What's wrong with that?
It can't be. It's as you say. Chances are I'll be lucky, but it's not guaranteed. Whereas now I can literally walk in there whenever I want.
Yeah, and all of Bulgaria can literally walk in here whenever it wants, or Slovakia, or Romania, or etc., etc. You get my point, Richard. The British people decided yesterday that under capitalism, freedom of movement of labour is merely a means of increasing the labour supply to drive down the wages and conditions and pressure the infrastructure and public services of the people already here, wherever they came from, whatever colour they are, however they pray. That decision was made yesterday, wasn't it?
But it sounds like I might be, potentially imprisoned in the UK. That's ridiculous, surely.
No, but you won't be imprisoned in the UK because the Netherlands government represents the people of the Netherlands who will want to come and go and visit Britain as they please.
Yeah,
and I don't think
they're living and working and retiring.
No, well, you have no automatic right to go and live and work in somebody else's country. That's a matter for them.
I have that. We have that now.
But too late. You no longer have it. Or at least when these negotiations are done. Well, look, you had plenty of time, Richard, to make that case, but it didn't work. Let's hear from Gareth in St. Helens. Gareth, welcome.
Hello, George.
Yes, my friend.
Hello. What an interesting few days it's been. About few months.
This Harold Wilson said a week's a long time in politics. Crikey, an hour and a half's a long time in politics.
It's been... You could not predict the outcome that we've had. It's been so divisive, the whole debate. It's highlighted splits where you wouldn't have thought they would previously be, but it's also united people that you would never thought would be united.
Mm-hmm.
I am more and more of the opinion that the political parties that we've got at the moment are becoming less and less relevant.
Yeah.
And
well, look what happened, Gareth. The people voted against all of the other political parties, with the exception of UKIP, who only got one MP.
Yeah. Well, it's a victory over Project Fear.
Yeah.
Because all we've had in the run-up to the referendum has been Project Fear. The Remain camp have not been promoting what would be good about remaining. They've simply been promoting what's been bad about leaving, or what they perceive as being bad. And
that was the same in 75, Gareth. There's a fantastic speech that I've been pushing that the late Peter Shore made at the Oxford Union on the eve of the referendum in 1975, when we'd only been in 2 years. And he made the point then that they can no longer offer you a great future if you stay in the common market, because you already know that's not happening. So all they can do is terrify you with how bad things will be if you come out.
Yep. Well, Lord Lawson, I believe it was, made a very interesting statement, and he said the alternative to being in the EU is not being in the EU. Most of the world is not in the EU.
Yeah, most of the G8, most of the G20, better. Most of the world. Most of the BRICS economies are the rising powers in the world. They're not in the EU. And by the way, Gareth, if you held a referendum across the European Union tomorrow on whether or not people wanted to join the EU, it would be overwhelmingly rejected. And I believe these dominoes are now about to start to fall.
I've said that all along, that if we voted to leave the EU, it would fall apart. We were the second biggest contributor after Germany. Now a massive part of money's gone, and everyone else is going to follow.
Well, I think we may be the catharsis in that, but I don't believe that it's collapsing because we're leaving. I believe that the internal contradictions of the Eurozone were bound to destroy the flawed project that they had. You cannot have a single currency between a highly developed, extremely rich, industrialized economy like Germany together with Slovakia or Bulgaria. You can't. All that's going to happen is that the public in the poor countries are either going to suffer or they're going to have to get on their Tebit bikes and go to the rich metropolitan countries and try and work there as migrant labour.
Yeah, well, the EU's great if you live in a poor country, but if you live in a country that's done well, and that does prosper, then you basically, in the simplest terms possible, propping up the poorer countries.
Well, no, I think the opposite is true, that it's great if you're rich in a rich country, because you get your macchiato served by a cheap labour waitress from Slovakia, you get a Polish builder and glazier and electrician, you get a Romanian nanny, all at knockdown prices. But as was proved yesterday, the vast majority in people in Britain don't have a nanny or a cleaner.
Yep.
And most of them don't drink macchiato either. I'll need to stop saying that macchiato stuff because my wife is a drinker of espresso macchiato. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows, and it's back only on Talk Radio. And it's every Friday night between 7 and 10, which means we've got 2 hours still to go. So stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows. 844-499-1000. I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. I'm here every Friday night from 7 till 10. But I need you to join in.
It's 8 o'clock, live from Westminster. David Cameron's stepping down as Prime Minister after losing the campaign to keep the United Kingdom in the EU. He'll remain until October with no plans to officially change our relationship with Brussels before then.
I held nothing back, but the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
Leave campaigner Boris Johnson has paid tribute to the PM as the race to succeed him begins. There are also questions over Jeremy Corbyn's Labour leadership. 2 of his own MPs want him to step down for not being positive enough about Europe. The majority of people in Scotland wanted to remain. That's led to the SNP First Minister Nicola Sturgeon planning for a second independence referendum.
The Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will. Scotland does now face that prospect.
Sinn Féin wants a new poll on the United Ireland. The majority of those in Northern Ireland also decided that they wanted to stay in the EU, as did most young people. Analysis shows areas with older populations tended to vote out. These teenagers are angry they didn't get a say.
A lot of the people who voted out are like older generation. Like, they should have a say, but it's a bit annoying. I think it's unfair because it's us is going to be affected the most in like 30 years to come.
It seemed like no one really knew what they were doing, but there's nothing really we can do about it now except go full on behind it.
The 27 countries left in the European Union should not take any revenge, according to the German Foreign Minister. He says they should focus on security, migration and economic growth. And more than £45 billion has been wiped off the value of the UK's biggest companies after the exit outcome. The FTSE closed down over 3%. That's the latest from Sky News. I'm Barry Weir.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Yes, the Top Cat is back, and every Friday between 7 and 10. And in fact, I'm standing in between 7 and 10, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week also. So plenty of opportunities to rejoin the University of the Airwaves, which is the mother of all talk shows. Now, if this is the mother of all talk shows, the Professor John Curtis is the daddy of all psephologists, and he's going to help us through exactly what happened yesterday and maybe even what happens next. Hit the phones, Jack and Jacqueline.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
OK, Britain's out of the EU. Cameron's out of number 10 Downing Street, though both are going to be a little bit delayed. perhaps more delayed than they ought. And Scotland might be out, at least if Nicola Sturgeon has her way, and Northern Ireland might be out if Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness have their way. So I guess you could say these are pretty seismic days. The prevailing orthodoxy has been turned on its head. The experts, all those with the degrees, as they kept telling us, were confounded. Everyone was confounded except those who actually knew what people actually think and say out there in the real world. Well, Professor John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, for which I was for 17 years, the Member of Parliament, he has been never off the television, basically, in giving us his analysis. I think it's time he was on the radio. Professor Curtis, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you. I hope you got some sleep. I've only had a couple of hours. But
not yet, no.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, look, John, the Lord Ashcroft analysis, is that accurate in your view? The percentage of Tories, Labour, Liberal, SNP and even UKIP that voted one way or the other?
Well, for the most part, it's pretty much in line with what the final polls that were done before polling day were saying. Indeed, quite a lot of this polling was also done before polling day. It's long been clear from every opinion poll ever since this all started back in last September that younger people were around 70 to 75% likely to vote for Remain. Over 65s, around 40 to 45% wanting to vote only for Remain. Graduates, 70%, 75% wanting to Remain. Those with few educational qualifications, usually around half that number, so around 35 or so. It's also been pretty clear for most of the referendum, indeed, I mean, this is the signal failure on David Cameron's part, is that only a minority of Conservative voters were going to vote for Remain, around the 40 to 45% mark. But one figured in Ashcroft's poll that's a little bit on the low side, which may or may not be part of the story of what happened in the north of England last night, I'm not entirely sure, is that he's got 63% of Labour supporters saying they voted for Remain and 37% for Leave. Most other polling would put it rather closer to about 70 to 30.
Yeah, well, of course, I was going to ask you about that, but of course that ignores the net. I mean, these are the net Labour voters. Several million Labour voters have already gone to UKIP, haven't they? So if I would call them natural Labour voters, but they voted Leave, and a significant proportion of existing Labour voters voted Leave.
Yes, I mean, I'm defining, in this case, a Labour supporter, somebody who voted for Labour back in 2015, and you're right that some of the people who voted for Labour in the past voted for UKIP in 2015 and were therefore no longer fall within my ambit. But I think the truth is, George, that the only party that was able to get more or less all of its supporters into the side of the referendum that they were backing was UKIP.
Yeah.
The SNP, it was only about 2-1. Labour, only around 2-1. The Conservative Party didn't even manage to get a majority in favour, and even the Liberal Democrats struggled. But I suppose what I have found a little odd in the course of the last 2 hours is that, sure, the Labour Party didn't do that well. Sorry, not the Labour Party. The Remain campaign did particularly badly in the north of England. And a little bit of lazy psychology has made people say, oh, that's because Labour voters didn't turn out and maybe even voted for Leave. Well, let's remember, not everywhere in the north of England is a Labour heartland. And above all, at the end of the day, that crucial reason why the Remain side lost is not because what happened inside the Labour Party. It's because of David Cameron's inability to get a majority of his voters on side, and that happened because he failed to unite his party behind the Remain camp. And in a sense, the crucial event in the referendum was the failure of his Brussels renegotiation to bring his party together to largely unify it, and as a result of that, Tory voters didn't change their views. The electorate as a whole didn't change their views. And I think that was the moment at which it was clear that Mr. Cameron was potentially in trouble And then above all, he had failed to repeat the trick that Howard Wilson pulled off in 1975 when he did virtually the same thing. So they're going to hold a referendum after I've renegotiated Britain's terms of membership, comes back with a piece of paper and says, I've reduced the cost of our membership, and public opinion swung around very dramatically in favour of staying. Mr. Cameron tried to repeat the same trick and signally failed. And that was the moment probably when, well, his fate wasn't sealed, but that was the moment when it was clear that the Remain camp had a serious fight on its hands.
Well, I knew Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson was a friend of mine, and David Cameron, you ain't no Harold Wilson. Now, John, you raised in the course of that fascinating reply the issue of the SNP. A number of things arise. My old friend Brian Wilson has just tweeted this in the last hour or so, and I hadn't noticed it before, but you've just confirmed it. Quite a considerable number of SNP voters actually voted against the EU.
Sure, yes, it's about 2-1, and it's always been the case that there's been a minority both inside the SNP membership and also amongst SNP voters who want independence outside the European Union. That's been clear on Scottish Social Attitudes, which I help run every year. Sure, but I mean, on the other hand, George, we should remember the contrast between the Scotland of last night and the Scotland of June 1975. In June 1975, Scotland only voted by about 58 to 42 in favour, much less than the UK as a whole. The Western Isles and the Shetland Isles actually voted against. Why? Well, at least in part because this was again another period when the SNP was riding high. But on that occasion, the SNP were campaigning for the UK to get out of the European Union.
Yeah.
It's perhaps now a little bit forgotten history, but that it's only since around 1990 or so that the SNP has been a pro-European party. But I think the truth is that having the SNP's change of stance together with its current popularity is still the principal explanation as to why Scotland is so much more pro-Remain than any other part of the UK, because whereas in England, a lot of the argument was, why is Brussels allowed to tell us what to do? The European Union is regarded as an infringement on the sovereignty of England or of Britain for many of those south of the border. In Scotland, however, because of the way in which the SNP have defined the independence vision that they have as independence in Europe, therefore Europe voting to stay inside the European Union is actually an assertion of a particular nationalist route that is thought would help to maximise Scotland's ability to become an independent country. So rather than contravening Scotland's sovereignty, it's seen as a way of advancing it. So I think it's a very different argument. Now, that said, sure, the SNP didn't take everybody with them. But hey, guys, even if the SNP only take 2/3 of their voters with them, given that they constitute around half of all the voters in Scotland, that is clearly a very substantial boost to the Remain campaign, and is enough to explain why Scotland ends up voting about 62% in favour.
No doubt about any of that, but I'm thinking ahead now to the referendum. Just talk us through the right. I mean, she spoke today as if it were in her gift to have a referendum. That's not true, is it?
No, I think there are three crucial stages to this process. The first, of course, is just simply public opinion. Now, I mean, I have no doubt that many a nationalist supporter, quite understandably, feels affronted at what happened on Thursday, and that the possibility that Scotland, a proud nation, should be taken out of the European Union against the democratic will that's expressed. And if you are a nationalist and believe in Scottish independence, that is clearly wrong, that Scotland should be taken out of the European Union as a result of English votes. However, of course, what we need to bear in mind is that for public opinion to shift in Scotland, it's not what matters is not how many nationalists are affronted, but how many unionists are persuaded to rethink their position.
Yeah.
And it's less clear as to how much that will happen. Now, at the moment, we still seem to have a small majority of people in Scotland who want to remain inside the Union. We've had some polling done in advance of last Thursday in which people have been asked, hypothetically, what do you think you would do if the UK votes to leave and Scotland votes to remain? And about 4 to 5% of people switch from pro-UK to pro-independence. And that's actually enough probably to take us to a narrow majority for independence. but it's only a narrow majority, it doesn't take you to the 60% that Nicola Sturgeon says that she wants. So I think one of the things that's going to happen now, Timon, is we're going to get all of a sudden we're going to get a lot more public opinion polling in Scotland as people try to find out whether or not those hypothetical answers are actually a good guide to how public opinion develops. And of course, I suspect public opinion in Scotland will in part be influenced what does actually prove to be the fallout from Brexit. If the Remain side are correct in their diagnosis of what the consequences will be, it may well be that a lot of unionists, on seeing the first possible lifeboat with Nicola Sturgeon at the helm, will be ready to jump into it because they wish to escape the calamity that's facing the UK economy. Who knows? Anyway.
Well, the corollary may also therefore apply that if there is no four horsemen of the apocalypse visible over the horizon, if the roof doesn't fall in, and on the contrary, the European Union begins to look as if it's in more and more trouble, then the soft independence option, which is independence within the EU, might begin to look a little less attractive, especially to that 1/3 of SNP voters who didn't vote for the EU last night.
Sure, absolutely, and neither of us can tell which of those scenarios will play out. But you're absolutely right, there's nothing certain. The second thing, of course, about which is not certain is whether the SNP can get the legal authority to hold a second referendum. Point that everybody seems to forget, and perhaps occasionally the SNP themselves, is that they no longer have a majority in the Scottish Parliament, and unless they can secure the support of the Greens for holding a second referendum soon, they won't be able to do anything about it. And so far the Greens have not made their position that clear. The other, of course, major issue is that the legal authority under which the September 2014 referendum was held, which was a grant of authority by the UK Parliament to the Scottish Parliament, was time limited. It's run out. And I don't think it's terribly likely that the UK Parliament is going to do it again. So we'll get back into the whole argument as to whether or not it is possible for the Scottish Parliament to word a referendum about independence that will not be ruled by the courts as being beyond its powers and ability to do so. And there was a long argument about that in advance of 2014. But then I think, George, we come to the really, really fascinating question. And here, for purposes of argument, I'm assuming that the European Union doesn't go into existential crisis as a result of what happened on Thursday. That is this. If the point of holding an independence referendum is to enable Scotland to retain its current status inside the European Union, then, frankly, the SNP will need the assistance of the European Union. And that Nicola Sturgeon will need to ring up Donald Tusk or wherever and say, look, if I do this, are we in or are we out? And if the European Union says, look, I'm sorry, you're part of the United Kingdom, and that's it, you're out. I mean, you can become independent, you can reapply, etc., etc. Her case will not look so strong. Conversely, if the European Union were to say to itself, well, actually, it might be in our interest to hang on to Scotland, even if we're going to lose England and Wales, it could decide to say, aha, some of the UK wishes to leave the European Union, but some of it wishes to stay. And the complete reversal in the kind of academic argument and the legal argument around the 2014 referendum, the European Union could say, well, okay, fine. So the Scotland is the bit of the UK that wishes to stay, so that will now be the continuing member, and Scotland will inherit the rights and obligations of the United Kingdom currently has, which of course includes an opt-out from the euro, an opt-out from Schengen, etc., etc. I mean, it's a fascinating question.
It is, but of course, Professor, if they were to do that, that would be pregnant with consequences for Spain, for the Catalan region, for potentially secessionist forces in many parts of the European Union.
Of course, that is true. But whereas before September 2014, for the Spanish government, that was the only consideration, it now has to balance that consideration against whether or not it is or not in the interest of the European Union to encourage Scotland to try to remain a part of it.
Well, I think
it becomes a rather more difficult choice, I think.
But I think what happens to Spain is more important to the Spanish government than what happens to the European Union, which is exceedingly unpopular and, of course, facing powerful and important elections just in the next few days. Professor John Curtis is the daddy of all political analysts and psephologists, and it's been a privilege to have him here on the mother of all talk shows.
Talk Radio.
We got entertainment, and we're not afraid to use it. Talk Radio.
Ah, I remember that one. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. You can text TALK and then your message to 87222. You can email me through the Talk Radio website, talkradio-.co.uk. Is that right? Does it sound right to me? No dash, talkradio.co.uk. You can tweet me at Talk Radio or on my own Twitter at George Galloway. Well, what's going down? Just everything, that's all. The Prime Minister's out. Britain are out of the European Union. Scotland's threatening to be out of the United Kingdom, as is the 40% or more minority in the north of Ireland. So I guess you could say that everything is changing. As John Prescott once memorably put it, the plates are shifting. Tectonic plates, although he thought they were China plates. Now, the other big issue that has emerged in the last couple of hours is that Jeremy Corbyn now faces a vote of no confidence in the Parliamentary Labour Party. He's just said on Channel 4 News that were such a motion to be passed, he would not accept it, and of course it could not then be implemented. But we might be into the schema of Joe Haynes, Harold Wilson's former press secretary, former Mirror Group grandee. Here was his schema. The Parliamentary Labour Party passes a motion of no confidence and then elects its own leader. And that leader then applies to the Speaker to be recognised as the leader of the opposition. And, of course, the holder of the purse strings of the short money, several millions of pounds of short money. And he then, or she, begins to take the place at the dispatch box at Prime Minister's questions. And Jeremy Corbyn then remains the leader of the Labour Party, but not the leader of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and not the man who is the leader of the opposition. Well, all of these are very, very big subjects, very, very big conundrums for anybody on the left. And my next guest is one of those, Salman Shaheen, who is a spokesperson for Left Unity, a left-wing political think tank, it says here. I think it's probably rather more than a think tank, but I'm hoping Salman is on the line now. Salman, are you there?
I am indeed. I should just correct you there. I used to be Principal Speaker of Left Unity. I actually stepped down when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader, and I'm now a member of Labour. But I can, of course, still speak to the disaster that's going on in Labour Party at the moment.
Yes, indeed. You're even better qualified than we thought then, because you are one of the people in a party whose leader is about to face a no-confidence motion tabled by a dowager, a multi-millionaire, if not a billionaire, actually. I think she's the wife of a billionaire, at least. She's tabling a motion of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn because he apparently didn't do well enough in the European Union referendum, even though her constituency of Barking and Dagenham voted overwhelmingly against the European Union. Irony or not?
Well, it's just such a ridiculous thing that the Labour Party, members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, are going after Jeremy Corbyn now. This is a time of crisis for the Conservative Party. They've been in all-out civil war. There could well be an election called now that Cameron has resigned. Is it at all sensible to be stabbing Corbyn in the back? No. The EU referendum is an excuse for the right of the Labour Party to be going after Corbyn now. They've been looking for this excuse for a long time, ever since he won the leadership, and now they've found it. I've met Margaret Hodge. She is a very passionate fighter against tax avoidance and evasion. If only she was training her guns on the Conservative Party with the same zeal, maybe Labour might win a chance to win the next election.
Well, that's not how it works, of course. These people have been dedicated from the day and hour of Jeremy Corbyn's election as leader of the Labour Party to finding a way to get him out. Now, when I first heard this story, Salman, earlier this afternoon, about the motion of no confidence, I didn't think it was serious. And if it had been serious, they wouldn't have put the Duchess of Islington up to table it. But I have checked just before coming on air with someone who should know, and it is serious, and they do intend to go for it now. So we must assume that they think that they have a majority, maybe a big one, inside the Parliamentary Labour Party to pass a motion of no confidence. Do you think they'll have the bottle to go the whole hog and actually overthrow Corbyn as leader of the opposition, leaving him just as the leader of the Labour Party in the country?
Well, I mean, I listened to the scheme that you were discussing there. It sounds terribly undemocratic. Jeremy Corbyn has a fantastic mandate from members of the Labour Party, many of whom have come into Labour because, and obviously we've been discussing all day the disenfranchisement of working class people around the country, which has led to this outpouring of discontent in this referendum. Jeremy Corbyn has fired up many of these people who Labour has abandoned for so many years, and to pull these machinations behind Jeremy Corbyn's back would, I'm sure, not go down very well with party members at all, but they may well have the gall to do it.
Well, they don't care about party members, of course, and as for those who've come in, they would rather you all went out again. So don't place any hopes in them being, if you like, put off this schema because you and people like you won't like it, because they actually want you all to go.
Indeed. I think Alan Johnson said something very similar soon after Jeremy Corbyn was elected. I have very little faith in the Blairites and the Labour Party. There's a struggle going on in the Labour Party. You've been party to these struggles yourself, of course. And now I think it is the task is upon us, the left in the Labour Party, to rally around Jeremy Corbyn and defend him. We may not win. We're up against tremendous odds. The people who feel that they are entitled to lead the Labour Party, the very same people who have betrayed everything that the Labour Party stood for so many years, and they will throw everything at it.
Well, this is the summer of our discontent. Salman Shaheen, thank you very much indeed. My apologies for mistitling you. You're now a Labour member, but your contribution was important. In any case, I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. I'm here every Friday night between 7 and 10, which means there's still 90 minutes left to play.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Well, I hope we've already got you talking, but if you're not talking on a day like this, well, you probably don't have a tongue because, well, there aren't many days like this. A day in which Britain left the European Union, the Prime Minister announced that he was leaving Downing Street. A motion of no confidence was tabled against the leader of the Labour Party. The governing party in Scotland announces that it intends to call another referendum and take Scotland out of Britain. And the Irish nationalists, Sinn Féin and others, have begun to raise again the question of the border and the very continuation of partition of the island of Ireland. Well, if that's not a busy news day, I don't know what would be. Well, I want your calls and I want your texts, emails and tweets. I'll remind you of the phone number again, 0844 499 1000. The calls cost 7 pence a minute plus your access charge, but we'll call you right back. Now I'm getting a flood of texts and email. I can't keep up with this. An attack on Jeremy Corbyn or John McDonnell will be an attack on all the good people of this country, and we will fight back for Corbyn, all of us, says a texter. And another texter says Brexit is a collective 2 fingers up at the elite. Well, that much is true. The putsch against Jeremy Corbyn is on way, and I can tell you it's serious. That's what I said earlier, and it happens to have the benefit of being true. Now, let me go to one of the very few trade union leaders who actually did speak for his members in yesterday's referendum. He is Tosh MacDonald. He is the president of the ASLENF, the Associated Society of Locomotive Engineers and Firemen, to give them their Sunday name. Tosh, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. You're one of the few union leaders who spoke up for the working class, or at least represented the working class point of view, because working class people, didn't they, voted overwhelmingly to leave the European Union?
Absolutely they have. You know, it's up and down the country we've seen, haven't we, that working class people have been so disillusioned with the, I think with the European Union, but also with the two official campaigns, the in and the out campaign, just spreading fear and negativity.
Now, your members and the members of the RMT, the other big railway union, and one or two others, but not many, the Bakers Union, an old reliable left-wing union. I still remember Joe Moreno, who was the leader for a long time there. But almost all the other union leaders, including some very left-wing and very historically Eurosceptic credentials, backed Cameron and Osborne, and they must be feeling a bit sore this morning.
Well, I'm sure they'll have done the same as we did and went through the democratic processes of their union, and their members come out with that policy, surely. You wouldn't just like to impose a policy on your membership, would you?
Yeah, he said with a tongue in cheek. Tosh, what happens now, surely, is that the Blairites overthrow Jeremy Corbyn, and it's a return to the status quo ante. You're an affiliated member of the Labour Party. ASLEF is one of the oldest affiliates of the Labour Party. Where will you stand on that?
Right behind Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, if the Blairites do try and do this, I mean, I think they're just so out of touch with the Labour Party now. They don't realise that it's the people who support Corbyn are now the mainstream in the Labour Party. The new Labour experiment has failed. It's gone.
And yet, Tony Blair, even though we're only days away from Chilcot, he's out unashamed, unembarrassed. He's on every television screen. There was a few minutes. I've got 3 screens in here, and there was a few minutes ago he was on all 3 of them at the same time, knifing Corbyn in the front. Now, I mean, when someone's got the brass neck that he has, it makes you wonder how. First of all, the media continue to give him such airtime, but how so many people in the Parliamentary Labour Party, even after the defeat yesterday, still think that Blair and his message are preferable to Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I think the important point you hit there was it's the Parliamentary Labour Party, it's not the Labour Party. And I think a lot of what Blair's doing is probably a bit of deflecting for what's going to come out in the Chilcot report.
Yeah, and not just him, by the way. There's all kinds of people going to get it on the Chilcot report, at least if it's a report worth publishing. And this all suits them, doesn't it, this chaos inside the Labour Party?
It does. And you know, the sad thing is now's a time and such an opportunity that if the Parliamentary Party got united around the rest of the party and around the leader, now is a time with the Tories in disarray that we should really be making some progress.
Now that we're on our way out of the European Union, the possibility exists to have a properly publicly owned national rail network in Britain, with the country owning the track and owning the rolling stock, and the country using railways as a strategic economic asset rather than something that private buccaneers can run, and we'll give them a huge subsidy to do it. Are you looking forward to that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things why we decided as a trade union that we should be voting for out of the EU. The 2001 first railway package brought in the liberalisation of the rail freight. In 2004 we got the second railway package, which brought in open access and set up the European Railway Agency, which wasn't to help people who work in the industry, it was to oversee implement of EU directives. And just in last October, they brought in mandatory competitive tendering for all public service contracts, not just on the rail network. You know, and it's strange that On the 21st of April this year, the European Parliament, that's supposed to be democratic, rubber stamped the market pillar of the fourth railway package. That's what allows train operators to complete access to the rail network of all member states to operate any domestic passenger service.
Yeah, the intention is to export the Richard Branson school of running a railroad from Britain to Europe, where any fool knoweth in France the SNCF is a fantastic publicly owned railway network, but it's going to have to follow the Richard Branson line.
Well, that's what the EU is intending to do, yeah. Now fortunately, we're hopefully going to be in a position to get a decent government elected. We only have to change one government now rather than 28.
Yeah.
And we can build a proper social country with a rail network and infrastructure that works for the country and for the people in the country rather than the privateers. You know, it's worth mentioning that on 1st of April of all days, April Fool's Day, at 2 o'clock in the morning, a strange thing happened to me, George. I went from working for Dutch State Railway to working for German State Railway. And the Dutch State Railway sent me through the post a pen to thank me for the blood, sweat and tears I'd given them in the last 12 years while they'd owned me. And the German State Railway sent me a lanyard so anybody who got on my train would know who I belonged to. You know, it's a nonsense. When we look at the East Coast Railway, when National Express failed,
yeah,
and the Labour government put it back into directly operated rail.
And it was a success.
It from, I think in 5 years, it put £1 billion back into the exchequer.
Yeah, and it was a joy. It was a joy to ride in it.
It was, and it reinvested £40 million back into the East Coast network. So why on earth would we want to give money away to the other states? The German State Railway, they give magazines to all their employees, including our members in Britain, and they actually boast that their interest in Britain's railways subsidises the German taxpayer. Where on earth are we going with this? It's just crazy.
Well, don't wear that lanyard any more, Tosh.
I don't. I wear an Aslef one, comrade.
Let's have a bonfire of German State Railway lanyards. That's Tosh MacDonald, the leader of Aslef, the Train Drivers Union. I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Across the UK, online and on DAB. Access all radios.
Talk Radio. Give it some lip.
0844 499 1000. Now, somebody texts, wouldn't it be great if some of the old regulars phoned in, like Fred the cabbie? Do you remember Fred the cabbie? The wisest cabbie in Christendom. If he's out there, then please, Fred, call us. Many people have, and I apologise to them. I've kept them waiting for so long. There's so much to talk about. Let's hear from Callum on a mobile somewhere. Callum, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
George, how are we doing?
By the grace of God, I'm good. And you?
Just like to say I'm a massive fan of yourself.
Thank you, Callum.
No problem. I would just like to ask your views on Martin McGuinness after the referendum to leave Europe. What your views on is him saying that this is going to end up with a united Ireland.
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
And Nicola Sturgeon's views on hopefully there being another referendum for Scottish independence. Just like to see your views on that.
Well, these are, of course, contradictory things. The key is in the word united. I believe in a united Ireland and a united Britain. And I do believe that the case for a united Ireland just got stronger because of the result yesterday. I agree with Professor Curtis that actually there is no legal authority for Nicola Sturgeon to call a new Scottish referendum. Mm-hmm. If perchance she does, it would be unofficial, and that would place us in quite turbulent times. I'm not sure the majority of Scottish people are up for that. There's not an appetite for an actual revolution in Scotland, I don't think. But if it turns out that there is a referendum, well, I'll do what I did last time and argue for the unity of the working class in this small island of English-speaking people. Where do you stand yourself, Callum?
No, bro. I'm not actually got a view on it at all. I actually don't view myself. I don't vote myself, actually.
Okay.
So I don't actually have a vote on it. But from my social circle and people that are surrounding me, most people agree with your political views.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Are you in Scotland?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. I might be back up soon to Glasgow. Callum, thanks for the call.
One more question, if that's okay.
Yeah, quickly.
When will we be able to hear George Galloway on radio more frequently than when you used to be on Talk Sport?
Well, I'm on every Friday night, and this coming week I'm on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as well, 7 until 10. That's probably enough for a week. Callum, thanks very much indeed for that wonderful call. Let's go to Rahul in Chatham in Kent. Rahul, welcome.
Hi there, George.
Hi, good to hear from you. Go ahead.
Yeah, nice to speak to you. First of all, I'd like to say I'd like to add my sentiments to what you said start of the show about Carl from Blythe.
Oh, it's a real heartbreaker, isn't it? After all these years, he waited and waited for me to be back on the radio. He loved this show. He was the first caller every week, and he never once let us down with these calls. There was never a nothing call from Carl. Whether you agreed with him or not, it was worth hearing.
He always educated many of us, I think. So yeah, I'd like to say that.
He was educated in the University of the Pavement.
Yeah.
He slept rough for many years, Carl.
I didn't know that.
He was for a decade or more. He slept rough, but he was sober for more than 30 years, I think, and he lived far longer than anyone probably imagined back then. Anyway, go ahead, Rahul.
So nothing's happened today, I suppose. I think there's you who quoted Lenin saying sometimes nothing happens in decades, and sometimes decades happens in weeks.
Yeah.
And it's happened in hours in our case.
Yeah, in hours. Yeah, there are weeks when decades happen, and there are. No doubt at all that the last day, the last 24 hours, has been seismic in its proportions. Where do you think it's all going to end?
Well, the point I would like to pick on, you had a gentleman on earlier who's worried about him, I think, retiring to
the Netherlands.
Yeah, to Holland.
Yeah.
And I think you'd agree that after the negotiations, we're likely to have visa-free travel to most countries within the EU.
Absolutely, if not them all.
Yeah, if not them all, and that would actually be the normal situation for
friendly countries.
Yeah, and the kind of relationship we have with all over the world. So at the moment we have not the normal situation. So I think we'd get back to something like how it should be.
Well, I agree entirely. You know, we have in the EU the most racist immigration system that we have ever had.
Yeah.
Because our immigration system means that overwhelmingly white people, if they're European, can come and live here, work here, do anything they like here. Whilst people whose name is like yours can't get their granny in to their son's wedding because she's Mrs. Rahul. Do you see my point? Well, that'll all change, I hope, Rahul.
Yeah, let's hope so, yeah.
Thanks for your call, mate. I need to press on. Alan is on the line. Alan, welcome.
Hip, George.
Welcome. Good to hear from you. What would you like to say?
I was going to say, first of all, I loved you in the Big Brother house. You still have one Big Brother.
I am the Big Brother. As I get older, I'm now more and more clear that people need to listen to me in a brotherly way.
More people voted in this referendum than they did in any final Big Brother, celebrity or normal.
Yes. Alan, thanks for rising to the occasion. Let's go to Fraser in Bolton in Greater Manchester. Fraser, welcome back, my dear.
How are you, George, old boy?
I'm great. You are the country's most famous St Mirren supporter.
Well, I don't know. I think David Tennant might. Well, Dougie Henschel, he beats me. But that'll do, George. I've missed you a lot. I'm very sad to hear about Carla Posto.
Very sad, yeah.
But hopefully before the evening's out, we'll hear from the wisest cabbie in Christendom.
I hope so. There's an all points alert out to Fred the cabbie. If you're listening, or anyone that knows you is listening.
He'll be back. Well, George, the one thing I wanted to say was, it's all very well in this year of celebration, but a very important point the Labour government, regardless of what side of the political sphere you are, the Labour Party needs to get sorted out, and fast and pronto. Because with all the potential spare cash and all the promises, and we've already seen some beginning to get revoked, hello Nigel, we're going to do this. There needs to be a huge amount of reinvestment in the country, and I'd like to know your views on this. Will be very quickly. Reinvestment basically in building of homes to solve a housing crisis, hospitals, schools, and my big bugbear is we need to do state-sponsored reinvention of the shipbuilding industry.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because it factually employs indirectly more people than any other industry on earth, and we're no longer shackled to the EU.
That's right.
To miss out on contracts. And we've got the infrastructure.
And we're an island, for goodness sake. We're an island with shipbuilding capability and potential. We built the greatest ships that ever sailed. We built on the Clyde. We built the Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth. We launched ships of steel when the Americans were still cowboys riding the range. Fraser, I've lost
globally, you know, there's going to be a global market. There's a huge demand for boats, shipping boats.
Yeah.
We're steel, everything that goes with it. And we need to have a left-wing place in power to stop all the money that's going to be not going to EU, getting split up and divvied amongst the uber-rich. And that's my big fear.
No, well, and there's every reason to fear it. Fraser, thanks. Great to hear your voice again. Let's go to Jonathan. Jonathan's on the line. Let's hear from him. Jonathan, welcome.
Hi there, George. It's good to have you back.
Thank you.
My question is what's your thoughts with the referendum result on what's going to happen with workers' rights? As I know you're a champion of them, and the EU do help in keeping workers' rights, and with the Tories in, I just worry that they're going to be taking it away even further. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't accept it at all. First of all, almost all the rights that workers have, we had before we joined the European Union, and they were won in the workplace by strong trade unions and by Labour in government, in town halls and in Westminster. The so-called rights that the much vaunted rights that the European Union gave us are more honoured in the breach, like, say, for example, the Working Time Directive. Anybody listening to this who's a low-paid worker knows that the first thing that happens when you go for a low-paid job is that the employer requires you to tick the box opting out of the Working Time Directive. In Britain, in 1975, the time of the last referendum, we had 13 million trade unionists in the TUC. We were a power in the land. No one could do anything without consulting us. We had equal pay for women, introduced by Barbara Castle, the greatest woman Prime Minister we never had. We had legalised gay rights. We had the Clean Air Act. We had ended censorship. In fact, in the late 1960s, Britain was really something in the world. The idea that we are some kind of primitive people, painting our faces blue and living in the forest, requiring a Roman Empire to come in the form of the European Union to give us rights, is the opposite of the truth. The European Union is a neoliberal banker's ramp. That's why the bankers spent so much money to try and keep us in. I'm going to squeeze John and Motherwell in. John, welcome.
Hi George, how you doing?
I'm great.
George, I'm a man from Motherwell myself, and you know, today I was an SNP voter. I voted for Scottish independence. I also voted for the SNP. But today it's been a big eye-opener for me, because the whole argument for Scottish independence has gone out the window for me for Nicola Sturgeon and her arguments that she's put up to remain part of the European Union. For me, do you want independence for Scotland, or do you just want independence from England?
Well,
and
that's
that,
it.
For me, is a concern.
And no, it's a very well expressed concern. And of course, let me put it into other words. Nicola Sturgeon wants out of a democratically elected union, but to remain in a union where there's no democracy of any kind at all.
Couldn't agree more with you, George. Couldn't agree more with you.
John, thanks for that. It's great to hear from Motherwell, North Lanarkshire. I'll be up there shortly. as I said earlier, this is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows.
It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. We better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. We better stop now. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Talk Radio. 24-hour radio debate and entertainment.
Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
It's George Galloway. It's the mother of all talk shows. And I need your calls. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. You can text me, email me, even tweet me. We're talking about today and yesterday and the most extraordinary events, probably of my lifetime, which has not been short.
It's 9 o'clock, live from Westminster. In less than 24 hours, the United Kingdom's voted to leave the European Union and the Prime Minister's handed in his notice. Anna Jones looks back at an historic day for the country.
The Leave campaign officially passed the winning post just after 6 a.m. devastating Remain voters.
I don't feel like this is my country anymore, that's how I feel.
I would say I've lost most of the faith that I had in politics and in humanity.
Less than 2.5 hours later, David Cameron was off.
I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
As markets tumbled, the Bank of England insisted it had a contingency plan. Boris Johnson got booed on his way out, then thanked the British people.
They have decided that it is time to vote to take back control.
Next up, the Scottish First Minister reacting to Scotland voting to remain.
The option of a second referendum must be on the table.
Echoing calls from Sinn Féin, who say Northern Ireland voting in means there should be a vote on reunifying Ireland. The Labour leaders also got problems to sort out, facing a motion of no confidence.
Well, European leaders are urging the UK to begin negotiating their EU exit as soon as possible. David Cameron's already announced the formal process of leaving won't start until his successor's appointed in the autumn. Meanwhile, Germany's warning there's a risk of a domino effect following British voters' decision. France is one country already facing calls to hold its own referendum, and its President Francois Hollande is calling for change.
An awakening is needed. In order to move forward, Europe cannot act as before. The people are waiting for Europe to reaffirm its values of freedom, tolerance and peace.
The pound fell on the back of the result, but the value of shares in the top 100 companies recovered slightly after plunging 7% at one point. That's the latest from Sky News. I'm Barry Weir.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite!
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio. Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Yes, I'm back. After a brief interregnum of 4 years. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the university of the airwaves. And we got lots of experts, most of whom tonight appear to be Scottish, just like my next one, although he's a Birmingham MP. You'll hear is distinctly Scottish. It's the Labour MP, Steve McCabe. Now, what else could we be talking about but leaving the EU, getting rid of our Prime Minister, maybe overthrowing the leader of the opposition, maybe Scotland leaving Britain, maybe Northern Ireland joining up with the rest of Ireland? Well, not bad for a day's work. It's the mother of all talk shows.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Now, as I said earlier, Dame Margaret Hodge, I'm not making it up, that's really her title, Dame Margaret Hodge, the Member of Parliament for Barking and Dagenham, has tabled a motion of no confidence in the leader of her own party because he didn't manage to save David Cameron's proposition in the EU referendum. So, we've heard from Dawn Butler earlier this evening on the previous show, Yasmin speaking to her. I'm not sure where she stands on the motion of no confidence. Let's hear where Steve McCabe stands. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi, George.
Hi, mate. Will you be voting for the motion of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn?
I don't know. I haven't actually made up my mind yet. I only picked this up earlier today, but, Jeremy himself, I think, said during the hustings that he thought the leaders should be up for re-election every year or 2 years, so I wouldn't imagine he'd be too fussed about it.
Of course, he meant up for re-election by the members of the Labour Party, not by a couple of hundred MPs.
Yeah, but isn't this a process? If there was a motion of no confidence, wouldn't that just trigger an election? So it's just a mechanism for getting there, isn't it?
No, that's a fair point. However, many people will wonder that if we might well be in for an early general election, whether this is the right time to do that.
Yeah, and as I say, I'm not sure myself whether it is the right time. I mean, I suppose the question that, look, this is my view. I think everybody should be doing a bit of soul searching after what happened last night.
Yeah.
And I suspect that Jeremy must be asking the question, how come we did so poorly in turning out the Labour vote for what was apparently the Labour position?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. So let's search our own souls. Isn't it the case, certainly in Birmingham it was, that the majority of working class people, through their own lived experience, not because they're racists, but because they concluded that through their own lived experience, the EU wasn't working for them. Isn't that right?
Well, I mean, I don't know. As you know, the Birmingham result was dead close. It was less than 4,000 determined the overall result. I mean, we won the Remain vote in my constituency by more than 3,000. So I guess that works out that if every other constituency had managed to get an extra 200 people to vote Remain, the result would have been different. So I don't know that we can make absolute conclusions like that. I mean, I think what it shows is that the Labour Remain case that was argued wasn't persuasive enough to get enough folk to back it.
Wasn't that inherently the case because working class people have now 40 years of lived experience of the EU and they don't think that it has delivered for them and that it actually threatens their way of life and their standard of living?
Well, I personally thought that kind of slogan, take back control, was really quite seductive and quite persuasive, and people were, repeating it to me on the doorstep, so it obviously had an impact. But I personally think it's probably a bit of an illusion. I'm not sure that we're taking back any great control. I think it might be the case that we're giving control to another group of people. So, I'm a bit more sceptical about that. In terms of jobs, well, we have to wait and see, but I've got the Cadbury factory in my constituency. If they can't sell their chocolate and their confectionery in Europe, that's not going to do much to protect jobs in my patch.
No, but of course they will be able to sell their confectionery because the countries to whom they're selling will want to be selling their products to us.
Yes, but as you know, I mean, confectionery is a very good example of where you would have to comply with EU regulations. So presumably what that means is we'll be selling our chocolate and our confectionery subject to EU regulations, but EU regulations over which we will now have no say and no control. The very opposite of the argument that was made for getting us out in the first place.
Well, of course, the EU member countries, assuming the EU continues, and that's not a done deal yet. The EU countries will be able to decide what proportion of sugar and milk and whatever else goes into your chocolate. and that's fair enough. That's their right as the customer, and your manufacturer will just have to comply with that, no?
No, absolutely. But I mean, I thought the whole essence of leaving was that we were taking back control and getting rid of all these EU regulations and directives.
It's just pure.
Isn't that what Brexit has spent the last 6 weeks arguing?
No, really, because it's a commercial thing, isn't it? If you're selling to a customer, the customer's always right.
Right, well, I'll take your word for that. As I say, I thought that the deal was that we were supposed to be getting the EU offer back and taking more control, and I'm just simply giving that as an example. It seems to me.
Well, let's not get bogged down in Charlie's chocolate factory. Let's go on to the bigger picture. David Cameron has gone. Seems to me that George Osborne is toast. All change at Westminster. Who are the runner and riders in your opinion, and who's likely to get the gig?
Well, I'll be very surprised if Boris doesn't get it. I mean, I think the whole thing has been about him positioning himself. So I think the Tory party must move further to the right, and I think he must get it. Obviously, there must be an outside chance that Theresa May's in there, but I don't think she's got much chance now.
No.
So my assumption is it's
worthy but dull, wouldn't you say? She's worthy but dull.
Well, she's a great survivor for a Home Secretary, but I mean, I just assume that, this has been teed up for Boris. I think Boris will win, and I suspect will be, your point right at the beginning, that we'll be in a general election by March or April.
Yeah, because he's not going to make the mistake Gordon Brown made of not seeking a mandate.
I doubt it. I think that's exactly what he'll do, and that's the best way. You catch Labour on the hop. Whatever your view about these things, they will have a couple of nice votes to bind the Tories together and to exploit Labour divisions. Trident's win. There's probably one or two others they can manufacture, and then he'll need a fresh mandate and need to go to the country. I think that must be the game plan.
Stephen, great to hear your voice again, mate. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. That was Steve McCabe, Labour Member of Parliament. He's not made up his mind whether he's going to support the motion of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. He acknowledges that it's part of a process, and that if such a motion were passed, that it would trigger an all-out re-election campaign, not in the country, but inside the Labour Party. So Jeremy Corbyn would have to fight all over again to become the elected leader of the Labour Party. Not many pundits would doubt that he would be re-elected, presumably with an even bigger majority. So you've got to ask yourself, what would be the point of that? Here's what I think. They intend, Steve may not know this, I give him the benefit of that doubt, they intend to not just pass a motion of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn in the Parliamentary Labour Party, they intend to elect their own leader of the Parliamentary Labour Party and seek recognition for that new leader as the official leader of the opposition and controller of millions of pounds of public money. It's just what I think. Tell me what you think. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Let's go to Imran on a mobile somewhere. I wish it would tell me where. Imran, go ahead.
Hi there, George. I'm calling from Ilford.
Okay, excellent.
Hi there. I've got to say I've never really disagreed with much of what you've said, George. But when it comes to the Brexit, I've got a concern. I'm just wondering what your views were.
Sure.
And my concern really is the far right. That we're seeing a sort of almost like a resurgence of the far right recently, particularly with some of the language used and the tone of the language that was used in by some people who were sort of campaigning to exit the EU. And now we're seeing Marine Le Pen also sort of asking for that. Geert Wilders also in asking for a similar referendum. And my concern is, are we going to see a sort of division of the EU along nationalist lines and a strengthening of the far right, and consequently, more repression towards minorities? What's your views on that, George?
No, I don't. First of all, Wilders and Marine Le Pen were growing stronger inside the EU indeed their countries remain in the EU. They haven't exited yet, although both might well do so in the short term. Look, racism exists, Islamophobia exists. It's even worse on the European mainland than it is here, and it's a problem here. It is not racist to be concerned about uncontrolled immigration.
I completely agree.
In fact, people who are already here from immigrant backgrounds are amongst the most concerned about that. And when the facts are all shaken out, I think you'll find that a very large number of minority ethnic community members here in Britain voted to leave the European Union. And I myself have met many of them. Bradford, for example, voted overwhelmingly to exit from the European Union, and there's 40,000 Muslims in the city of Bradford. So I don't myself think that there's anything racist, apart from anything else. The overwhelming majority of European Union citizens who have the right to come and live and work here until yesterday are white people. The people who can't get into this country are people with names like Imran. And I've spent nearly 30 years trying to get visas for the grandmothers of people like you, even to come to their grandson's wedding or graduation with increasing difficulty. So it's not racist. Of course, there are some racists who support that demand. But actually, I believe that what happened yesterday is the best way of quelling the rise of these far-right organisations. The worst case would have been a narrow majority for Remain. Then you would have had a festering, rumbling sore of being cheated, we was robbed, and all of that. Now that doesn't exist, Imran. That's my view, sir. Thanks for the call. Mick is in Edinburgh. Let's hear from him. Mick.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Go ahead, sir.
This is my first call and my first time on a radio show.
Okay.
I believe that's 100% success rate.
Yes.
A bit like your referendum record of late.
You don't what?
I'm saying it's a bit like your referendum record of late, 100%.
Okay.
My question, George, is it in the best interests of Adams, McGuinness and Co. to call for the Irish reunification vote before or after 2018?
Well, I mean, they have already called for it, for a border poll, and I think that they are right. Of course, whether or not the North of Ireland, the 6 counties, would respond to that call and how they would vote if there were such a poll is a little bit unclear. The majority of people in the North voted to remain in the European Union, not by a huge margin, but we had the fairly surprising spectacle of Sinn Féin that used to be very strongly anti-common market. They were all out for Remain. So, roughly speaking, the Unionist constituencies voted to leave the European Union, and the nationalist constituencies voted to remain, though in both cases there was some crossover. So I don't know. The only way that the island of Ireland can be united, which I have all my life supported, is by consent. This is accepted by the Republicans and it's accepted by the British. But I hope that that consent can be obtained, and the only way to do that is by persuasion. And maybe this event that took place yesterday and this morning, maybe that will be a step along the road to obtaining that consent. What do you think yourself?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, George. But do you think it should be an all-Ireland vote, or should it just be Ulster?
Well, I think the people of all Ireland have a right to a say on what happens in Ireland, and I'd go further. I think the people of Britain have a right to be consulted, which they won in the Scottish referendum. You see, I think that there's a big myth amongst certain unionist sections in the north of Ireland that the British people are desperate for them to stay disunited with the rest of Ireland. And I don't believe that that is true. I've believed since the 1970s that if the British people were asked, should Ireland be a united Ireland, that the majority of British people would say yes. And of course, if the same poll was held in Ireland, the overwhelming majority would say yes. But you're never going to get that until you've persuaded enough of the people who currently regard themselves as unionists to get that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, George. I mean, knowing the British government that I do, I'd say it'd only be the people in Ulster that would be voting. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Well, look, Nick, thanks for the call. First-time caller, first time ever to call a radio show, and 100% success rate. Let me give you the number again. It's 0844 499 1000. You can text me at talk, then your message to 87222, or you can email us through the Talk Radio website. You can tweet us at Talk Radio or at George Galloway. We're talking about the most extraordinary 24 hours or 36 hours, I forget now because I haven't had any sleep or not much, in the lifetime, my long political lifetime. I have never known 36 hours like this. I speak as one who campaigned to withdraw from the European Union in 1975, when very many of you were not even born. And I did so under the leadership of Tony Benn. And somebody asked me earlier, why did Jeremy Corbyn do what he did? And I'm going to let you in on a secret. The only reason that Hilary Benn was kept on as the shadow foreign secretary was sentimentality. Jeremy Corbyn is quite a sentimental man. And he couldn't bring himself to remove Hilary Benn from the position of shadow foreign secretary. But Hilary Benn would not continue in the job unless Jeremy Corbyn pledged his troth on the European Union. And I said at the time, this is a very grave mistake. As a matter of fact, Jeremy Corbyn's Euroscepticism is electorally popular. It's more electorally popular than any other position that he holds, and that he should have held to it. And if he had done, well, he wouldn't be facing this motion of no confidence next week, I think, on Tuesday. It was to keep Hilary Benn because, like me, Jeremy loved Hilary's father and didn't want to sack him. I happen to believe that if not for that sentimentality, he would never have kept that job, and Jeremy Corbyn would have been free, at least, to say all Labour members are free to pursue their own particular political position on this. And, well, the rest, as they say, is history. 0844 499 1000. Let me go to some of these texts and emails. In the old days, you see, I used to get a big file of paper brought through. So many trees were cut down for me to read texts on paper. Now I've got to read them on a screen, and I'm not sure that I'm able to operate this screen. Now, of course, it's not just the European Union, and it's not just Jeremy Corbyn. The runners and riders for the Tory leadership are now pretty clear, although there may be some John Major figure who is waiting in the wings. In the rest of the show, which goes on until 10 o'clock, I'll run you past some of those runners and riders.
Talk Radio. Listen, phone, talk.
Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
I went to see Bruce Springsteen with my wife at the Wembley Stadium just a couple of weeks ago. I'll tell you, if there's better value out there than Bruce Springsteen in concert, I wish I'd seen it. It was truly phenomenal. Is there anyone out there? That's what I'm asking. 0844 499 1000. Plenty of callers on the board. Let's take some of them. Steph is in Edinburgh.
George?
Oh, good to hear from you. Go ahead, Steph.
Yeah, obviously I've been following the campaign over the last few weeks. Myself being Scottish, I'm now a bit concerned about the whole independent India reference too.
Yeah.
The SNP are again trying to push.
Yeah.
What's most disconcerting is that we've already had this vote, and I know that she's saying a fundamental difference. The thing is, what I'd like to know is, having looked at some of the figures from last night, I do believe that a lot of people in Scotland voted to remain simply to push the SNP agenda. And what would be interesting to see would happen is if they had their India reference to and lost.
Well, that's, of course, one of the things that preoccupies her. Of course, if they had an Indie Ref 2 and again lost it, then that really would be the SNP's project dead and buried. Not for 2 years this time, but for decades to come. So the stakes are very, very high. Here's my take on it, Steph. I don't believe there's going to be an Indie Ref 2. I don't believe that the EU will be what it is today by the time 2 years from now comes along for Scotland to be so madly in love with. Thirdly, I don't believe that Nicola Sturgeon has the legal authority to call a referendum. I don't believe, fourthly, that the calling of an unofficial referendum would be a sensible thing to do and might take us into quite dangerous territory. But lastly, that if they did have an Indie Ref 2, I believe that it would be again defeated. Where do you stand on that?
I'm utterly against anything the SNP stands for, apart from Trident. Not in the fact that, I believe we should maintain our long-range surveillance remote systems. I am all for unilateral nuclear disarmament, but when you've got people like Iran who are quite unstable and we never know what the future would hold, we cannot just give up.
Actually, Iran might be many things, Steph, but it ain't unstable. The Islamic regime in Iran has been in power for 33 or 35 years, and I promise you it's not going away anytime soon, so it ain't unstable. But I take your point.
Let's hope that they sort out Syria, because, and this takes me on to something else, which is a bit of an oxymoron. If you take what's happened over the last 24 hours in this country and the reception and vilification of Mr. Trump. Now, I don't have an opinion one way or another, but I'm very concerned that Clinton is intending to increase defence spending on American forces on the ground by 400%.
It's very hard to believe how you could even do that, given that the United States spends more money on weapons than all the other countries of the world put together. Yeah. Steph, thanks for the call from Edinburgh. This is the mother of all talk shows. Many, many interesting texts. I just haven't had time actually to go through most of them. George, even though I'm one of your biggest fans, I voted for Remain, mainly in disgust at the anti-immigrant rhetoric of the far right. Nevertheless, I hope you're proven right in your optimistic post-Brexit predictions. For instance, months ago you predicted that David Cameron would go. He has. That the Tories would implode. They might. Most of all, I hope that Corbyn will overcome the backstabbers in the Parliamentary Labour Party and win the next general election. It's great to have you back on the airwaves. Best wishes, Asif. Thank you very much, Asif. Very well summarised position. Now, Kirsty Blackman is the SNP MP for Aberdeen North. Of course, therefore, she was a campaigner for Remain yesterday, which won in Scotland, but which lost in Britain as a whole. I'm going to infer that she supports the statement of her leader, Nicola Sturgeon, today, in which she said that the independence referendum 2 is very much now on the table. So let's explore that with her. She's been good enough to come on the show. Kirsty, welcome.
Good evening. Hiya.
First of all, What was the result in your area, in the northeast of Scotland? It was a bit closer than it was some other places, no?
It was in some parts of the northeast of Scotland. So Aberdeenshire and Moray had pretty close results. In Aberdeen, it was a pretty clear result for Remain.
Mm-hmm. Moray was 50-50, I think, no?
It was really pretty close, yeah.
So, anyway, leaving aside the issue of just how Europhile Scotland is, and I fought the referendum in 1975 when it was one of the least Europhile places in the EU referendum, or the EC Common Market referendum as it then was. Leaving that aside, do you really believe that the Scottish Government has the legal authority to hold another referendum on independence so soon after the last one?
I think the Scottish Parliament has a right to choose if it should hold a referendum, not so much the government, but a majority within the Parliament. I think that's completely reasonable if that's the will of Parliament based on the will of the people.
Is it legal
though? A reasonable way to go.
Is it legal?
Is it legal? I don't think it's illegal. I don't think there's anything that we can't do.
As you know, the last referendum took place under the legal authority of a decision of the Westminster Parliament, which has now expired. Not the Parliament, but the legal authority. So it would require the Westminster Parliament to pass new legislation for a second referendum, wouldn't it?
Well, I understand in terms of technicalities we could have a referendum without that. Obviously, there was the historic Edinburgh Agreement, and genuinely nobody knows what would happen if we had to negotiate, another independence referendum. I think that if we had the backing of Parliament, if Parliament wanted an independence referendum, I think it'd be very difficult for Westminster to say no. Particularly,
it's just that you promised us that it would. Alex Salmond was never done telling us that this was the last chance for a generation. And now, even in these fast-moving times, 2 years is not a generation.
And I completely understand that, but it was not foreseen that we would be dragged out of the EU against our will. And I've had some of my friends that most vociferously were in favour of no, getting in touch and saying, I would support Scottish independence now. I'd rather be European and Scottish than be outside Europe. So there has been a real mindset change with some people.
Yeah, although that wasn't demonstrated in the Scottish Parliament elections in May, was it? Because actually you lost your majority in the Scottish Parliament.
In terms of the number of MSPs, we've got fewer MSPs than we had previously. It's very, very difficult to get a majority in the system of proportional representation that there is. It's set up so that we don't do that. And actually, it's so unusual for a government to be as popular as the SNP government has been, even now. This far in.
I'll grant you that, but it doesn't seem to indicate a seismic shift, at least in May, and this is only June, that towards the support for Scottish breakaway. And
I think the key thing, the thing that has possibly changed people's minds, and it's really too early to tell, has been, the referendum. I don't think that you can't really necessarily equate support for the SNP with support for independence. They're two different things. And, the Green Party got a sizable vote and have got, some MSPs as well. So
would they vote, you think, for a new referendum? Because they've got the balance, don't they?
There's a majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who are in favour of independence, because the Green Party, that's in their manifesto that they favour independence too.
Yeah. So it's quite likely then that Nicola Sturgeon will get her way and that there will be a referendum. Of course, that then opens up, we can't speculate as to what the European Union will be come 2 years from now.
Yeah, and just to stop you there, I think we need to take a step back, that it's not we're immediately jumping into a referendum. It's we will do our best and we will see what we can do to ensure that Scotland stays within the EU. And I think that's the key thing. Those avenues with talks with Brussels and things need to be explored first. It's not immediately we will have an independence referendum. It's let's see what we can do.
It's within 2 years of the triggering of Article 50. So that's basically 2 years come September. Sometime in that period. Here's what I just don't get, and I think you are weak on this, but not you personally, but the SNP and the independence argument is weak on this point. Why do you want to come out of a democratically elected union in Britain, but remain in an entirely undemocratic union in Brussels?
Well, you can argue the nature of democracy there, because actually the Westminster Parliament's not particularly democratic.
No, but it's a lot more democratic than the EU.
Number of lords.
No, I agree, and I'm in favour of not until the last lord is hanged by the last ermine robe and all that. I agree with you on that, but it's a lot more democratic than the EU, which is not democratic at all.
The EU is relatively democratic. And, actually, if you look at...
Did you elect Donald Tusk or Herr Juncker?
I didn't, but I did get to elect my members of the European Parliament.
Yeah, but the European Parliament has no power.
The European Parliament has some power.
Well, very, very little. A parish council compared to the power of the European Commission and the Council of Ministers.
But then, you get into the nature of discussions about power. So in terms of the Westminster Parliament, do we actually directly elect the Prime Minister?
Well, look, you would never accept the level of powerlessness in the European Parliament. You would never accept a Scottish Parliament with such little power.
I think one of the differences between the European Union and the United Kingdom is the way that those two things are set up. So in terms of the European Union, there are vetoes. There's the ability to opt out of things for nation states, and there is that ability. Whereas within the UK, Scotland feels quite a lot of the time that we have things done to us.
Well, you have them done to you by the European Union, and the difference is you have a say in electing a British government, but you have no say in the election of the European Union's government.
But the British government have a veto over some of the things that the European Union do.
Well, increasingly few things, because more and more things are subject to qualified majority voting.
Whereas Scotland has no veto over anything that Westminster does to us.
No, I think the point that you made earlier was a good one, that you don't want to be dragged out of the European Union against your will, but you propose to drag Scotland out of the United Kingdom against the will of the rest of the people of the United Kingdom. How fair is that?
I think it'd be interesting to see what the levels of support for Scottish independence are within the rest of the United Kingdom. We've never asked them. And actually, having spoken to quite a few people around London, I spend more time in London than I ever have before. Speaking to those people, there's quite a few of them that are, relatively in favour of Scotland having independence.
Well, not me, and I'm Scottish. I didn't even get a vote. Look, Kirsty Blackman, it's been a pleasure to disagree with you. Thanks very much indeed for coming.
Yes, you too, thanks.
On the mother of all talk shows.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
A new kind of talk radio. We'll get you talking. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
I had breakfast with Jerry Springer once, No, there's no story. There's no Jerry Springer story behind that. He just invited me to breakfast in the Dorchester Hotel in Park Lane in London. He's a very fascinating fellow. I'm going to listen out for his show. The Boy, that's spelt B-H-O-Y, says, George, you're a fanny. Of course, I think he means that in the American sense. But just a tip, boy. That's not how you spell your in this context. And an emailer says, George Galloway, got a chance to speak to you earlier for the first time. I'm 36 now, and I've been following and listening to you since I was 26. That's 10 years ago. And I must say it was an absolute pleasure. You're a champion, and the only person in the media and politics that speaks for the working class people. God bless George Galloway. Thank you very much indeed for that very kind email. Made up for the insults of the boy. Shan is in Motherwell. My goodness, is everybody listening, calling, and an expert tonight? Scottish? Go ahead, Shan.
It's Siobhan, sorry.
Siobhan, I beg your pardon. Go ahead.
I'm okay, George, thank you. It was just to highlight something that hasn't been shown or broadcast in any of the media, and that was the positivity that no matter what age, gender, race, or creed you are, the positivity that everyone is taking active involvement in politics and an interest in politics.
Yeah. People are not, I've always said this, Siobhan, people are not apathetic about politics. They're apoplectic about the pathetic nature of the politicians. But give them a cause, give them a big cause, a big question, and huge masses of people get entirely engaged in it. This European referendum, of course, occasionally has been unpleasant and was marked by, scarred by, the most horrific crime that took place in the Batley and Spen constituency. But scores of millions of people in Britain were politically engaged by this referendum, as indeed happened in the Scottish referendum that you and I remember well.
Oh, definitely, and it's been a long time coming, and it needs to be people actually hold their politicians accountable for their actions or lack of actions, because it's been too long that people have just sat by the sidelines and not actually done anything with regards to who their local MPs are or who the actual constituents are that run the country. And we need to actually stand up and go, no, we're not happy, we want this done. And it's been a lot of people are too busy watching their Coronation Street or their Big Brother or things like that. They know more about that than they know about their local politics.
Yeah, well, here's hoping that things are beginning to change. Thanks for that, Siobhan. Let's stay in Scotland and talk to Colin in Glasgow. Go ahead, Colin.
Hi, George. How you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. I've enjoyed the show. I hope you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first time I've listened to you, and for 2 hours and 46 minutes, I've learned more your show than I have in the last 36 hours that I've been following the EU referendum.
Oh, well, good, thanks.
I'd like to ask you a question, George.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why I've prompted me to phone you. Like I said, I've learned more you in the last 2.5 hours. And my face has been glued to Twitter all day, and I've watched people that I follow that are in the media and all that.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to realise that although they've got an opinion, if we believe everything that you say, which I do, because you're a politician and you're in the media now, what do you feel about some of the media that comes out with their say? Now, their columns, and they've got people now reading it, and they're trying to make a judgment on what they're saying in the column. What do you feel about it?
Well, I think that the so-called experts have been yet again confounded. These experts that told us it would be a disaster for us if we didn't join the euro were utterly confounded. The experts that told us we had to invade and occupy Iraq were confounded. A pity more than 1 million people had to give their life's blood in the sand in order to prove that. All these experts that told us, and the markets that followed them, that we were going to remain in the European Union yesterday. At one stage, one guy that I see on Twitter said that the betting markets now showed that it was 90% certain that we were going to remain in the EU. And within half an hour, that 90% certainty had become a certainty the other way. So I don't hold much with experts, and the idea that you've got to be an expert to have a valid point of view, and I even heard it said several times on the television that people with degrees, I don't have a degree. I left school at 16. I was never at university. I have no degree. But I'm an expert. And I'm an expert because I listen to people like you, because I meet people like you, and I meet people like the general public that are everywhere, and you form your opinion, if you've got any sense, based on evidence, based on what people are telling you and what you can observe with your own eyes. So I think the mainstream media, as it's called, lamestream media I call it, is going out of fashion, and more people are seeking new ways to inform themselves and educate themselves. I mean, I've got now 1 million people following me on social media. That means I can send a message to 1 million people. In fact, I've got a reach on social media of more than 12 million. So that's a lot more than any television program. It's a lot more than any newspaper article. And I can reach these people directly myself.
Well, after today, you'll have 12 million one, George. I'm just about to follow you on Twitter.
Thanks, Colin. I appreciate that, pal. Let me go back to the... now, someone, David McCarthy, says disappointment, but it's not very clear. about what he means. George, are you on the mic and typing concurrently? Multitasking? No, my missus is doing the typing. And your average Joe, who usually is worth listening to, Joe and Josephine, says it seems foolish for UK Labour to seek to remove Jeremy Corbyn now. Going to need a new leader after the next election, whatever. What a blindingly obvious and simple point to make. Let me just run past you again what it is that Labour is proposing to do, or the parliamentary Labour is proposing to do. And we had a Labour MP on here today who said he hadn't made up his mind whether to join in on this. And another Labour MP earlier, Don Butler, who was, I think, a little bit equivocal on the question. Labour MPs are proposing to, simultaneous with the Prime Minister of Britain resigning and the Tories being effectively without a leader and potentially imploding over tensions over the leadership in the EU and what happens next in the negotiations and so on, at that very moment, Labour MPs are proposing to have a leadership election of their own. Now, frankly, that is close to insanity. It's close to political insanity. And, of course, it cannot even work. Because if Jeremy Corbyn says, in response to a no-confidence motion being passed against him, get it up you. Get stuffed. I don't care about your motion of no confidence. I'm continuing. I know what's going on. I'm going on. If that is the attitude that Corbyn takes, and I believe it will be, then there's nothing these MPs can do about it. And if they force a new election for leader of the Labour Party, Corbyn will be overwhelmingly re-elected. So what will have been the point, except to snatch defeat from the potential jaws of victory? It be the equivalent of blowing yourself up at the exact time that your political enemies are blowing themselves up. But maybe there is the rub. Maybe we're in the early stages of a redrawing of all political boundaries. And I personally hope so, because, frankly, we have an unhealthy political system and structure. As Kirsty quite correctly pointed out earlier, the SNP MP, our democracy is not democratic enough. And our first-past-the-post electoral system, which we have at Westminster, means that you effectively have two big tents that contain within them at least two parties each, and maybe more. I mean, the Blairites, the Dowager, Baroness, whatever it is that she's now called, Dame Margaret Hodge. Dame Margaret Hodge has far more in common with the Liberal Democrats and with the Cameron pro-European wing of the Tory party than she has in common with Jeremy Corbyn or me. And therefore, why should the electoral system force her to remain in the same party as Jeremy Corbyn? Shouldn't we have, dare I say it, a more European system whereby there's a party of the left, a party of the centre, and a party of the right, and you can vote by proportional representation and get a government that properly reflects the actual political temperature in the country? That's what they have in Europe, and that's what would be good to have here, because, frankly, our politics isn't working. Nobody believes us, said a cabinet minister in the last few days of the Euro referendum. Nobody believes us. And here's why. Because for decades, the British people have been systematically let down where they were not being systematically betrayed. And we're coming up now, it's only days away, from the report of the Chilcot inquiry, assembled over many years and at very great public expense, which, if it's going to be worth the paper that it's written on, is going to show us that we were led into a war on an entirely false prospectus. We were led into a war that's still raging 12 years, more than 12 years later. That we were led into a war that begat another war and another one and another one, and that the cascading of extremism around the world continues apace. And that's one of the main reasons why, to quote that cabinet minister, nobody believes us. Nobody believes you because once bitten, twice shy. And that's true on both sides of the Atlantic. One of the reasons why Donald Trump is rampaging through the US political system is because of the discrediting of the political class. And the discrediting of our own political class is what led to the defeat for the European Union forces yesterday. Of course, people were concerned about free movement of labour. Of course, they were concerned about the lack of democracy in the European Union. Of course, they were concerned at the net expense that the British taxpayer has to incur in order to remain in the European Union. All of these things are true. But the main reason why the experts were thrown out on their noses in yesterday's referendum is because nobody trusts them any longer. Nobody believes them anymore. And that's because people know that they will say whatever needs to be said to get their way, to get re-elected, to get power, irrespective of whether they believe it or not. Now, I promise you this, on the first of the mother of all talk shows, I will never lie to you. I will never tell you something that I don't believe. I might be wrong, but I'll never be telling you a lie. Now, I'm back on Monday at 7 o'clock.
Talk Radio. Dial up some dialogue.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.